let's go and talk to our first guest of today. I recently had the unfortunate experience, although not as unfortunate as my friend, of watching a friend of mine die of motor neuron disease, and I've talked about that, and I won't repeat the details of that, but it was very distressing. I've watched two people now die of motor neuron disease in this country. The first was the mother of my daughter, my oldest daughter. She died of motor neuron disease in her early 50s. And then I watched my best friend die of motor neuron disease this year. And one of the real issues that motor neuron disease sufferers in this country is that they know that when they are diagnosed with this dreadful and appalling disease, that they know they're going to die. There is no cure, like many incurable diseases in this country and in the world. But they were not able to access, no matter how bad their plight would become, and it does become very bad when you've got motor neuron disease, they would not be able to access the voluntary euthanasia legislation that we all voted upon at the last election, the election before that. And overwhelmingly, 2/3 of New Zealand voted for that legislation to be brought into being. It was the End of Life Choice Act, which has been in operation, which, despite all the grievance and claims and things like that, doesn't appear to be being abused, but in actual fact is very restrictive. And so restrictive to the fact that almost no motor neuron disease sufferer in this country, in fact none, can access it. And that also applies to an awful lot of people who are currently dying, and dying in the most straitened and horrible of circumstances, and for themselves and for their families wish to exit this life with some dignity and as quickly as possible with medical assistance. Now, the law allows them to do so except for one thing, and it's a fatal flaw in the legislation that was passed through Parliament and voted on by us. And that is, it says you must be able to die within 6 months of you applying, essentially, for medical assistance to end your life. And that 6 months must be verified by two medical professionals who say, yep, you're definitely out of here within 6 months. And that has meant that literally, potentially, scores, maybe hundreds of New Zealanders who thought that relief was at hand have been cruelly denied such. Well, to address that deficiency, it appears in the voluntary euthanasia legislation, ACT MP Todd Stephenson has entered the region. He's lodged a Members' Bill in Parliament's ballot to extend the eligibility for end-of-life choices, and he joins us now. Todd, welcome to the show. I guess the issues that I've just raised with in my introduction to this, you've come across on many, many occasions.
Yes, and thanks for having me on, Michael. Absolutely. In fact, you've outlined the issue very eloquently, and I appreciate, obviously, you've got a real personal experience, and also I just want to acknowledge your advocacy in this area, with the first attempt that you made to bring, some dignity to people with terminal illness. But it is literally the 6-month issue that, you have to demonstrate that you're likely to die from your terminal illness within 6 months. It really is causing an issue here, and that's what my bill addresses. It just literally deletes that 6 month requirement, so you still have to obviously be suffering from a terminal illness. There's a number of other safeguards, but you don't have to, say that it's going to be likely that you'll die within 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not likely either, is it? You actually, you've got to have two medical professionals who say you are going to, because on pain of imprisonment and punishment to them.
Well, the wording is actually that the terminal illness is likely to end that person's life within 6 months. So, the amendment. Yeah, so the term is actually likely, but yes, I mean, people are obviously medical professionals are signing this off, so they obviously are very cautious. In many cases, in motor neuron disease is a classic example of one where that disease is going to end a person's life. It is a terminal illness, but it's very hard to put a time on that. It's usually, well in excess of 6 months.
This is the only change that you're making. I'll come to other potentials at the moment. But in the passage of, as I said in my introductory remarks, the End of Life Choice Act that brings in voluntary euthanasia in this country, there is a group, I think, that's set up to oversee and report regularly on its operation to Parliament. Apart from the 6-month issue, have there really been any other issues that those reports have raised that need to be addressed?
No, so what's happening at the moment, Michael, is that there is actually a review of the End of Life Choice Act. So that was built into the passage. After 3 years, it had to be reviewed, and that will be completed in November. And it's really looking at two things: the operation, like how is the actual process operating? Is that going okay? And then there is actually also an opportunity for people, members of the public, just to raise other issues. So that hasn't reported yet. But the issues that have been raised directly with me and with ACT are around this restriction of 6 months, and there are some others. That is obviously the biggest one. What we can see, because there is very strict reporting, and I think, again, you talked about this in your opening, every quarter we know the number of people who have applied, the number of people who have been granted, and then if they are actually declined, the reasons. And there is a large number of people have been declined because they can't meet that 6-month threshold. So again, that does indicate to me that's where the issue is. And yes, you're right, my bill is it's very narrow, just looking at that one issue at this stage.
No, I mean, I understand that. But I mean, there are other issues there, obviously, and one of them that I can immediately think of is advanced directives. They are excluded currently from being able to be enacted, even if you are in a coma and you've said, for God's sake, let me out of here, in those sorts of circumstances. That Act does not deal for that, does it?
No, it doesn't. In fact, ACT accepted a separate petition around advanced directives earlier in the year, and that is another issue that is related, but it is actually a bit more complex when you are talking about it end of life. And again, the End of Life Act at the moment requires that you are actually you have the mental capacity to actually make the decision. Obviously, a directive, an advanced directive like you're talking about, you're actually making that at an earlier point in time and saying, this is how I want it to be looked after. So, yeah, those issues are related, but it is quite a complicated area.
Yeah, no. Listen, that won't go away, though, because we're talking about dementia, Alzheimer's and those sorts of things as well.
I absolutely agree, Michael, and I think, again, I think that'll be raised in two ways. I think definitely with the review that's going on through the Ministry of Health. I think, if I can get my bill to a select committee, absolutely, those other issues will be raised by others, and, I'm very happy to hear the arguments for and against them. But I think, separately, and I've been talking to some other MPs, there's something we need to do around advanced directives and kind of care directives anyway, because again, you might have a catastrophic car accident tomorrow and turn up at a hospital, and it's not always immediate to those healthcare professionals what advanced care directives you have in place, because they're not centrally stored, etc. So yeah, I think there's two parallel parts of work we could also be doing.